Why does the SRX work? And what can other motorsports series like NASCAR learn from it? How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove, midweek edition of the show. I hope your week is going smoothly. This past Saturday night, Tony Stewart and Ray Abraham's Superstar Racing Experience wrapped up their inaugural season in front of a sold-out Nashville Fairgrounds crowd. The largest Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway crowd since the 1970s got to witness Bill Elliott versus Chase Elliott for much of the evening, with Chase Elliott, the defending NASCAR Cup champion, ultimately prevailing. Talk to anybody who was there in person or talk to pretty much anyone who watched it on TV and they would say the entire event was a huge hit. And that rhetoric is not limited to just the Nashville Fairgrounds finale. I think if you ask anyone who went to an SRX race or watched the SRX from their couch at home, most would say the SRX either met or even exceeded their expectations. A brand new series in its first ever season faced a lot of hurdles, a lot of challenges, but they clearly carved out a niche for themselves in the American motorsports landscape. Capturing the attention of fans, sponsors, and drivers, the SRX is set up pretty nicely going into its second season next summer in 2022. But with their first season now coming to a close, I thought this would be a good chance for us to talk about some of the unique characteristics of the SRX, what made the SRX work, and what can other motorsports series, namely NASCAR, learn from the SRX's first ever season. Firstly, we have to talk about characteristics that are unique to the SRX. And at the very top of that list is how the SRX brands itself. To me, the Superstar Racing Experience is the perfect made-for-television racing series, and I think they wore that on their sleeve. Let's start with the drivers, because that's not something that NASCAR, IndyCar, or any other motorsport series can just easily replicate. The Superstar Racing Experience features drivers who have nothing to lose, and that's what led to many of these drivers showing incredible amounts of personality on national television. Paul Tracy tussling with just about everyone in the field at some point, Michael Waltrip cursing on live TV. Of course, you have motorsports legends like Tony Stewart, Bill Elliott, Bobby Bunny, Elio Castroneves, who have nothing to prove. A big difference between the SRX and, say, NASCAR is that the drivers in the SRX don't have major corporate personal sponsors paying millions of dollars to be featured on their fire suit, on the hood of their cars. And I think that frees up the SRX drivers to show a little more personality. You'll make riskier moves both on and off the track that you just don't see NASCAR drivers make. Now, besides the drivers, another reason I say the SRX was perfect made-for-TV racing is because they fully embraced the entertainment side of things. I don't know if they showed this over every broadcast, but I noticed it during the Nashville Fairgrounds finale. There was an SRX hype video where Lindsay Zarniak described the series as where racing and entertainment collide. I believe that was the mission statement that the SRX tried to stick to throughout their 6-race schedule. Even though originally when they pitched this series, I think their mission statement was a little different. I mean, if you looked at their website, this is racing with all the guts of a 750 horsepower V8 engine. This is racing the way it was meant to be. This is what fans want. No complex point systems, no prima donnas, just racing. It was clear early on that the SRX was attempting to appeal to the disillusioned NASCAR fan. You know, the NASCAR fan who maybe isn't a huge fan of many of NASCAR's recent changes. I think that's who Tony Stewart and Ray Abraham were trying to pitch to initially, and then somewhere during development, I think the mission statement changed more into the where racing and entertainment collide statement that Lindsay Zarniak used to describe the series on TV. But that's what I mean. This series was built for television from the ground up, from its, strict 2-hour TV windows, completely spec cars from the ground up so that every driver was driving pretty much the exact same thing, fun flags being thrown out during the race, effectively a caution clock, interviewing drivers during the race like while they're racing under green, random draws for the start, inverts between heat races. Tony Stewart in the final race gave up his starting spot so Bill and Chase Elliott could start in the front row together. Must finish under green, that came into play at Slinger, no live pit stops. All of these elements were put into place to try and create the most entertaining racing product possible. Not the purest racing by any stretch of the imagination, but the most entertaining. And another unique characteristic of the SRX that I think played into their strengths was their schedule. 6 very unique, very different short tracks, 2 dirt, 4 asphalt, a mix of premier venues like Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway that's gotten plenty of national media attention in recent years, compared to Slinger, kind of a hidden gem up in Wisconsin. And the schedule again lined up very nicely with TV. Only 6 races during kind of a lull in the American motorsports calendar calendar. You know, it started just after the Indianapolis 500 and kind of took place during a dry portion of the NASCAR schedule, like Pocono doubleheader, New Hampshire, second Atlanta race. So it filled an otherwise pretty stale gap on the motorsports calendar. So these are all just some of the unique elements of the SRX that I think helped make it a success, but also help identify the SRX for what it is, a made-for-television racing series. So is there anything that a made-for-TV racing series can teach NASCAR? For example, NASCAR is considered the premier motorsports series in the United States of America. Largest crowds, highest TV ratings still, biggest purses. What can NASCAR, the premier racing series in America, learn from the superstar racing experience? After just one season, only 6 races, is there anything NASCAR can learn? The answer is absolutely yes. First, the SRX proved that there is still an appetite for quality short track content. Again, there are estimates that over 14,000 fans poured into Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway, the largest crowd in 50 years at that track. And if we look at the TV ratings on CBS for the SRX, 6 short track races all averaged about 1.3 million viewers per race. That's as many or maybe a little more viewers than most NASCAR Xfinity Series races draw in. Now, granted, most Xfinity races are on cable. CBS, SRX, that was network television, so gives the SRX a natural boost. For an all-new racing series, an unproven racing series, in a competitive time slot, I think those numbers are decent. So what NASCAR should take away from this is that yes, more short tracks is a potential answer. I think NASCAR knows that, and I think SMI, for example, knows that. That's why they've been working hard to renovate Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway and perhaps North Wilkesboro Speedway and bring NASCAR back to one of or both of those tracks in the next couple of years. To the credit of both NASCAR and SMI, I think they do understand that more short tracks will be popular with its fan base and will help draw in new fans. That's why NASCAR is working to renovate Auto Club Speedway, convert that into a half-mile short track in the next 2 years. So I think NASCAR gets this, but if they weren't sold already, I think the SRX should have taught them that America loves high quality, well-produced, short track racing content. Another thing I think NASCAR can learn from the SRX is that shorter races are a good thing. I'm sorry, but in 2021, NASCAR Cup Series races at Texas Motor Speedway can't be 3.5 hours long. They just can't. Every SRX race, for the most part, fit very nicely into that 2-hour TV window. They didn't waste any time, just 7-8 minutes after going on the air. Engines were being fired, green flag was flying. The SRX crammed a lot of action into a fairly short time slot, and I think NASCAR could learn a thing or two from how the SRX handled that TV window. In my opinion, only crown jewel races should stay their current distance. You know, Daytona 500, Coke 600, Southern 500. But aside from those select 3 or 4 races, every other NASCAR Cup Series, Xfinity Series, Truck Series race should never be longer than 3 hours. I think most NASCAR Cup Series races should be in the 2 to 2.5 hour time frame, which may mean reducing the lengths of some races from 400 or 500 miles to 300, maybe 350 in some cases. But I think that change would make NASCAR so much more palatable to new fans, potential new fans. I mean, look at Formula One. You can't deny Formula One has significantly increased its popularity in the United States the last few years. And I think a lot of that is because, Formula One races never stretch longer than an hour and a half, 2 hours. NASCAR races sometimes drag. That stage 2, early parts of stage 3, I'm sorry, it's easy to lose interest. The SRX proved that you can put on a fantastic motorsports event and keep it under 2 hours in length. And so I think NASCAR should learn from that and keep, again, all races outside of a couple crown jewels under 3 hours in length. I think that's something NASCAR should seriously be pushing for. If it's not something they can get done before the TV contracts run out, once 2024 hits, that should be at the tip of their tongue when negotiating the next TV deal. Races should be under 3 hours almost entirely. And speaking of TV, the SRX and CBS absolutely embarrassed NASCAR on Fox and NASCAR on NBC. Alan Bestwick and James Hinchcliffe especially, they sounded like they'd been a broadcasting team for years. Their chemistry was so good. And what it really told me is that big names should not be prioritized over the best talent. I know Fox was super excited to get Jeff Gordon, arguably the greatest race car driver ever in the TV booth. NBC with Dale Earnhardt Jr., Jeff Burton, Steve Letarte. And I'm not saying all these guys are necessarily bad, but every person I just named is worse than James Hinchcliffe in the booth. And James Hinchcliffe, IndyCar fans obviously very familiar with James Hinchcliffe. As primarily a NASCAR fan, I don't know much about James Hinchcliffe, quite honestly. I don't know his backstory, but I loved hearing him talk about stock car racing at short tracks in the booth for 2 hours. He was fantastic. He was phenomenal. And that's why I've been pushing lately, with Jeff Gordon set to retire from his TV duties, I've been pushing for Fox to put Jamie McMurray in the booth. He's not the biggest name in the world, not the most successful race car driver ever, but the little bit we have heard him on TV, he's fantastic. Prioritize talent over superstars in the booth. That's all I'm saying. Aside from the talent though, the way the SRX and CBS structured their broadcasts, to me, was the gold standard and should be the standard going forward for any motorsports broadcast. They structured their deal with CBS in such a way that we, the audience watching at home, never missed a lap of green flag action. They would show commercials during green flag racing, but it was always side by side, so you could still see the battle while, the progressive ad or whatever showed on the other screen. Not to mention the fun flags or the stage breaks, whatever you want to call them, gave CBS a good chance to show commercials without us, the audience, missing any racing. And again, NASCAR has sort of done that. That was part of the original purpose of stage racing, is for those caution periods to allow the networks to show a lot of commercials so they don't, in theory at least, have to show as many commercials over the racing itself. Obviously, Fox and NBC have kind of pushed the issue a little bit, and I don't think stage racing has had as positive an effect there as we had hoped, but that was the original purpose, or one of the original purposes of stage racing. But I think NASCAR needs to push even harder by the time the next TV cycle rolls around. By 2024, I think NASCAR needs to push really hard for very few full screen green flag commercial breaks. I understand you got to pay the bills, but we got to restructure the business model. We got to find money somewhere else, because full screen commercial breaks 10 laps into the race or with 15 laps to go in the race absolutely tunes viewers out. I think the current model is costing NASCAR and the networks more money than they realize, both in the short and the long term. And lastly, as far as the broadcast is concerned, CBS did a fantastic job highlighting the personalities. Like, every driver in the field had a mini documentary that the broadcast would show at some point during the race each week. Like, we'd get to see a look into Bobby Labonte's life, him working on cars. We'd see Tony Stewart's personal life, whole segments about Paul Tracy, Castro Neves talking about his Indy 5. Like, CBS did a fantastic job giving the audience glimpses into each of these drivers' superstars' lives. And so if you're a casual fan who maybe doesn't know a whole lot about Ernie Francis Jr., during the broadcast, they would do an amazing job of teaching you about Ernie Francis, giving you a reason to support, to root for him, giving you his backstory in an interesting, engaging, colorful way. And usually they'd save these little mini docs for between the heat races, before the main event, during the caution, the fun flag yellow, so you still weren't missing any live racing action. CBS handled the personalities perfectly and gave fans like me, who maybe didn't know a lot about Ernie Francis Jr. coming into this, or about some of the IndyCar guys like Marco Andretti. I learned a lot about those drivers watching this series. So credit to CBS and the SRX for that. That's something I think NASCAR can absolutely learn from the SRX. And lastly, this one may be controversial, and that's part of why I saved it for last, but maybe the NASCAR schedule should be shorter. One huge thing the SRX had going for it is that they artificially created high demand for their product by severely limiting the supply. Only 6 races? I mean, blink and you'll miss the entire series. 6 races over 6 weeks turned the SRX into a hot commodity, a limited edition item. I think that's what helped them sell tickets and pack many of the grandstands from the tracks they went to. I think that helped their TV ratings, got them over the million mark. People tuning in because if you don't watch this weekend, guess what? It's not happening next weekend. It's only a limited edition. They artificially increased the demand for their series, and I think that worked into their favor. Now, NASCAR has roughly 38 weekends a year that they race. The Cup Series races 38 times a year if you include the exhibition races. I understand that the more racing there is, the more money there is, and the bigger the industry is, but to me, I think the networks, NASCAR, the teams should be pushing for a slightly shorter schedule. Maybe a 32 points paying races a year. Shorten it just by a few weeks. It could have a few benefits. You're not cutting into the NFL season as much, which I think hurts ratings at the end of the year. And 2, maybe there's a lot of tracks that you only go to once. I mean, I'm sorry, but Atlanta does not deserve 2 dates. The fans just aren't turning out for it. I think there are very few tracks on the schedule that should truly get 2 NASCAR Cup Series weekends a year. And so if you look at all those other markets and you tell them there's only 1 race a year, fans will pack the grandstands. It's just natural supply and demand. 1 weekend a year for most markets means sponsors, teams, NASCAR itself pull out all the stops for that 1 weekend and make it a weekend to remember. As it is now, when we went to Atlanta for the second time a few weeks ago, that kind of felt like a throwaway race. It felt like nobody was really putting that much emphasis on Atlanta. We go to Vegas twice a year. Phoenix, I know, is the championship weekend, but twice a year. I mean, I do think that's something that, again, should be explored during the next TV contract negotiations. one race a year for a lot of venues, maybe shorten the schedule from 38 weeks to like 32, 34. Start somewhere. I think that's something NASCAR should consider, but again, I saved this topic for last because I think it should probably be the lowest on the list of priorities. I think everything else I talked about are things NASCAR and the network should consider first before they consider maybe condensing the schedule a little bit. That's just my opinion. I know I rambled a lot in this video, but long story short, yes, there are a lot of things NASCAR can learn from the Superstar Racing experience. Even though it's a brand new series that, wasn't even pulling in half the TV audience most NASCAR Cup Series races pull in, even on cable, there are still things that the SRX is kind of guinea pigging that I think NASCAR should take note of. And I listed them out for you guys right there in this video. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this gave you something to think about. And I want to hear what you guys think about the SRX and what you think NASCAR could take away from the series, if anything. Leave your comments down below. I look forward to checking those out. But as for me, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR day in, day out, news, rumors, predictions, and much, much more. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. I could not do this show without your continued support. More to come this week. NASCAR is off for the next 2 weekends, but there's still going to be plenty of things to talk about. If you missed it yesterday, Brad Keselowski confirmed his 2022 plans. Pretty huge story. We talked about that and reacted to it on Out of the Groove, so go check that out if you missed it. I will see you in the next video. Have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.